What's up, guys? So today I just want to talk a little bit about Resident Evil Code Veronica. Seeing all the hype for the remake coming out. Resident Evil Code Veronica is like top three my favorite Resident Evil games. I would probably have it maybe at the third or second spot behind Resident Evil Remake, maybe Resident Evil 2. But I think Resident Evil Code Veronica, at least before the announcement of this remake, really did not get the credit it deserved. And even though a lot of it for me is nostalgia, there is a lot of objective reasons why this game is actually a pretty significant game in the series. Going back, Resident Evil Code Veronica was the first Resident Evil game to enter the quote-unquote next generation at the time, which at that time was the sixth generation of the PlayStation 2, Nintendo GameCube, and Sega Dreamcast, which the latter is what it actually came out for first in the year 2000. It was released for the Dreamcast. And it gets a little confusing because there were two versions of Resident Evil Code Veronica that were officially released. One was just the game itself, Resident Evil Code Veronica. But then a year later, they released a updated, completed version, which was called Resident Evil Code Veronica Complete. And then for the PlayStation 2, however, that game ended up becoming titled Resident Evil Code Veronica X, which effectively is more or less the same as the complete version. So there are a few differences between the original version and the complete version, which are pretty substantial. Even though they're not like dramatic differences, the effect that they have on the narrative and the plot are actually pretty big. The main thing about the original version is that it featured much less of Wesker. As we all know, Resident Evil Code Veronica was where Wesker saw his triumphant return to the series, rising from the dead, a ghost out for revenge after his untimely death in Resident Evil 1. But in the original iteration of this game, Wesker was kind of relegated to almost like a tertiary character. A lot of his scenes were cut. He only had about two main scenes in the game in the original version. It wasn't until the completed version, or the Code Veronica X version, where we saw much more of him, and even a few of the scenes were reworked. In the original, he never actually ran into Claire Redfield, so they never physically met. And his powers, too, were very nerfed. He was almost a pushover in the complete version, which I hate to say. It's really interesting. The first time you really see him was when he runs into Chris at the Rockford facility, where he kind of, just toys with him a little bit. But then the next time you see him is when he's confronting Alexia, which this fight was major different. And I love Wesker. He's one of my favorite characters, but in this original version, he got his ass handed to him. And I think I can't say that I like that version better, but it put over Alexia as this, like, dominant villain monster that couldn't be stopped. Because you're seeing if Wesker, who basically just wiped the floor with Chris, a little while earlier, got his ass kicked, you're like, oh shit, this girl is crazy. Like, I don't want to mess with her. But fortunately, that was changed with the complete version. So not only do we see several additional scenes with Wesker running into Claire and at the end of the game too, but the fight with Alexia is a lot more balanced. And I think it's a lot more true to Wesker's character and his powers, that he puts up a pretty good fight. They pretty much stalemate each other. So it's really interesting that they kind of didn't really see much of Wesker in the first version. Of course, the Code Veronica X version, the complete version, is the official canon, although now it doesn't really matter because they're remaking everything, and that, according to Capcom, this new series of remakes is the new canon for Resident Evil. And I will say, the Dreamcast version, even though I only ever owned the PlayStation 2 version and never officially played the Dreamcast version, that Dreamcast version is probably the best looking version of the game, presentation-wise, from a graphics perspective. It is silky smooth, and I think it runs at a much smoother frame rate as well. So I would say the Dreamcast version is the superior version out of any of the original releases. That's not to say that the PlayStation 2 version was really bad. It was still really good. Like I said, this was the first Resident Evil game to cross over into the next generation, and we saw that a lot in a lot of the mechanics and a lot of the camera movement too. This game is very similar to the way Dino Crisis implemented its camera within a 3D world. And I know a lot of fans weren't happy with the fact that Code Veronica went full 3D because doing so got rid of the pre-rendered 3D the pre-rendered backgrounds, which meant that not a lot of detail was really placed into the textures and the objects in the background. So it did kind of give it like this washed out look, but I don't think it's bad. I think for the technology they were trying to implement, it was still very impressive. The fact that the camera was a lot more fluid, dynamic, moved around. We saw a lot more of the world. There were some really cool scenes where they kind of transitioned like from a zoomed out shot to like a close up once you go past a certain point. It really did make leaps and bounds for the series, being the first game out of the PS1. A lot of the fighting mechanics as well were changed, and the knife in particular was very much upgraded, and it was a lot easier to use and actually kind of critical to use the knife because you could, like, that weapon, no joke, is like one of the most overpowered weapons in the game. You can take down pretty much most enemies. That is actually what I use mainly to fight the Bandersnatches. It is very effective, ironically. Also, the weapons that you acquire. This is the first game, I believe, yes, the first game where you can dual wield weapons in dual target. You get a pair of submachine guns, you get a pair of semi-automatic dual pistols, you get, some novelty weapons like the linear launcher. You have a lot of weapon upgrades. The crossbow can shoot explosive arrows. So the game really did add like a whole new level of dynamicness to the combat. And you can say that maybe this game was what started the whole trend to a more action-oriented series. It was a lot more fast-paced. You did see a lot more enemies. However, that is not to say that this game was not rooted in survival horror, because ammo conservation was very critical in this game. And if you go in guns blazing, you will run out of ammo and your life will be miserable. So the combat part was still very much akin to early Resident Evil survivor horror. Same thing with the exploration. This game was not linear. This game actually opened up quite a bit past a certain point, and you can branch off and choose how you want to explore the Rockford Island facility. And this game was also, in my opinion, probably one of the most difficult games of the series. Even in compared to like some of the games that come out now, I would still place this game very high on the list of difficulty. The challenging aspect of the gameplay was absolutely there. The creepiness was there. The atmosphere may have dropped down a few steps, like I said, because of the lack of the just amazing textured backgrounds that we saw from the original trilogy, but it still maintained a creepy atmosphere, and there are actually some themes in this game that are very, very unsettling. In particular, the theme that comes to mind the most is in the morgue type area where you encounter this infected doctor. That part was really creepy, and they do several times throughout the game. When you are going through one of the door loading animations or going down the stairs, it goes into like this slow-mo mode where you hear your heart beating and these steps are exaggerated, and it's a very, very slow pace entrance into the next area. And those are some of the most tense moments in this game. So Code Veronica definitely still brought that fear factor. There are a lot of just abominable monsters. As I mentioned, the Bandersnatches earlier, those visually, their monster design are just very bone-chilling. There's a new redesigned hunter enemy that's twice as deadly because it now is poisonous and can put you into a poison state, which it's pretty difficult to keep your health up in this game as well. It's pretty fairly balanced once you play it a few times, so it's not like it's unfairly hard, but it is difficult. So this is truly the pinnacle of the first three Resident Evil games in terms of gameplay and difficulty. I love the fact that we have Claire and Chris together in the same game. Now, unpopular opinion, Chris Redfield is my favorite Resident Evil character. I know, let the pitchforks fly. I like him way more than Leon. So it was a really cool thing to see Chris, because this at the time was the first game he was in since Resident Evil 1. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe that this is the only game that Claire and Chris are physically together, not including like the retellings of this game, like the Dark Side Chronicles, which is the same story, just, you know, reimagined. Or like spin-off mini games like Mercenaries 3D that aren't canon to the story. I do think this is the only mainline canon storyline game where Chris and Claire are together. You can correct me if I'm wrong. And of course, seeing Wesker again always give me chills. I am looking. That's probably what I look forward to the most whenever I replay the game. It gives me goosebumps. It's epic. He's a badass. And they really did do a very good job at balancing his power while still being a very shadowy rogue figure that operates in the background. He wasn't up front and center. He's not all over the top animated like Resident Evil 5. The complete version really was the true embodiment of Wesker as a character. The environments and locations that you visit are very dynamic, very diverse. You have training grounds, you have the island as a whole, you've got a palace, you've got the Spencer Mansion 2.0, which was, pretty surreal seeing that, especially if you played the first game. It was this uncanny valley where it's like familiar but different at the same time. It plays into the lore too, which I'm a huge fan of the story. I know some people think it's cheesy. A lot of people hate Steve. He is pretty annoying, the way his voice actor is. But I think that's a pretty major point of potential improvement in this remake. Because I think all that was missing was to give him a more serious voice actor, and I think his character would have had a lot more impact. I love the side story with the Ashford family, with Alfred and Alexia, his obsession with his sister to basically revive their legacy and just fight for their family's glory within the Umbrella Corporation. I kind of want to do a separate video on that because the way that the Ashfords are connected to the series and Umbrella is actually really cool. And I also just want to kind of briefly mention the whole story with Alfred and what it actually is and what it's not. Because, of course, once this game was announced that it was remade, a lot of controversy came up surrounding Alfred's character. And, of course, when I was playing the game, it never struck me as, like, demeaning or demoralizing to a specific group. What Alfred has is the Norman Bates psycho syndrome, where he is just so obsessed with his sister, who is, assumingly in the game, you think she's dead. She is like his everything. And the lengths he goes to preserve this illusion in his mind that she is alive is what causes him to dress up as her and to put on the wig and to wear the dress in a very similar fashion to the way that Norman Bates dresses like his mother, because he truly in his mind thinks she's still alive. Whereas with Alexia, it's kind of different story, but Alfred wants to preserve this illusion that she is there and even haunting Claire and Steve through the first half of the game. So that is where the whole cross-dressing angle comes into play. And it's not so much that Capcom's or that it's really shaming a certain group. He's a villain, and he is a very disturbed character, and the Ashfords have a very disturbing backstory. Because Code Veronica is, in my opinion, like a great game. And like I said, I love the story. It's creepy, it's chilling, it's haunting, and it connects to the rest of the Resident Evil series in a really nice way as well. It bridges together a lot of the events of the game, and it also creates kind of a bridge to the future, which, according to the remake, we are going to see a lot of connections being made with this Veronica remake. And in the trailer, of course, we saw Hunk, it's a very interesting move, but that also just leads me to believe that this was Hunk that we saw in Resident Evil 9 also, because they are really tying together the survivors of Raccoon City, Leon and Claire and Hunk, and them all meeting at some point or another. Of course, Hunk being Umbrella's most loyal soldier and the Grim Reaper who is impossible to kill until we kill him in Resident Evil 9. That is very much Hunk. Now, granted, Hunk might not be dead. He could still have survived, or he could, they could come up with some shenanigans to write him back. But I am very excited to see exactly how they connect the series. I think there's a lot of opportunities to do that, both past and future. Excuse me, Wesker, of course, is integral to that. Seeing him before in leading the Stars team and then becoming aligned with this new organization, the HCF, the Hive Capture Force, ultimately working with Ada. Just the fact that was expanded upon the Resident Evil 4 remake makes me think that they're really going to expand on this organization that Wesker works for, which also includes the likes of Ada Wong. And I think they're going to really, kind of blow our minds with some of the revelations and some of the reveals. I think we might even see a few characters who weren't originally in Code Veronica come out in this game. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of talk about why Code Veronica is one of my favorite Resident Evil games in the series, and why I do think that, just from a critique standpoint, it is actually a pretty important game, and a game that deserves a lot of praise for what it did. Again, it brought Resident Evil into the next generation, and it really did some pretty innovative things with the visuals, the presentation. And this one probably, had a much more emphasis on storytelling. It's a pretty cool transition, going from Claire exploring the island and then eventually getting into the Antarctic facility, learning more about the Ashfords, seeing Alexia, and then you go back as Chris. You get to play as Chris again, and then you actually encounter Alexia. And it's a fun game. It is a lot of fun. By no means is it flawless. It has its flaws. We see a lot of returning enemies. We see a tyrant again. We see the giant spiders. The hunters make a return. So I'm expecting a lot of great things from the remake. I've been saying for the longest time that I want this game to be remade. I wanted it before Resident Evil 4. And I think it has so much potential, and I'm so glad that Capcom is finally realizing that. And it's great to see them bringing in these newer fans and them getting a chance to relive what Code Veronica was. And also, like, the people that are complaining that the title is just Veronica, like, seriously, find better things to critique, because just because it's called Veronica, it doesn't have code in it. People are acting like, oh my god, that's gonna make this a no deal for me. That annoys me more, is that people are pissed off that the fact that the title has dropped the word code in it, and like all of a sudden it's gonna be a terrible game now. And another thing that's kind of legit is that I see people somehow insinuating the fact that they dropped the title, that they're gonna cut out a lot more of the game, and they're comparing it to what they kind of did with the Resident Evil 3 remake. I mean, that's yet to be seen, but I think that's, a little ridiculous to think that just because it's not called Code Veronica, that the game is going to have a lot of its areas cut. Let's see what Capcom does. Let's see what Capcom does. If it does turn out that they cut out a lot of the game, then we can sit here and critique that. But until then, like, you don't know. You don't know. Oh, one thing I wanted to mention really quick as well is that this game also has the greatest save room theme. Hands down. Moment of relief. You don't really actually get to a save room until quite a decent chunk through the game, so once you do hit it, you feel at ease more so than the other save rooms. Like, the save rooms in Code Veronica are like just these little islands of bliss. Deal to the difficulties around you and the challenging nature of the game. You feel even more accomplished once you hit that save room and that music starts playing. And that is, no joke, like, one of my favorite parts of the game. So again, yep, what do you think about the remake? What are you looking forward to? What did you love about the original? Leave your comments below, and until then, I'll see you later.